Hello, welcome to another amazing interview in the Creative Entrepreneur Series. I'm your host, Bob Baker, and as always, I want to encourage you to get on the VIP email list so you don't miss any of the upcoming interviews. I've been, on average, posting one new one a week, so if you want a regular dose of inspiration, please get on the email alert list, and all you have to do is if you're watching the video version of this, there should be a link to the site where you can sign up somewhere on the page here, whether you're watching on YouTube or my site or wherever. If you're listening to the audio podcast version, then all you have to do is go to DIYcareermanifesto.com. That's all one word, and there should be some really obvious links there where you can get on the email list. And when you do, you also get a big, fat, free sample of a book that I'm working on called The DIY Career Manifesto, the unconventional guide to turning your talents and know-how into a profitable business. So get on the list, stay inspired, let's keep in touch, and now, here's this week's amazing interview. Hello and welcome to another episode of The Creative Entrepreneur, and I'm really thrilled to be talking to another old friend of mine, Marcia Yudkin. Hello, Marcia, how are you?
Hi, Bob. I'm great. How are you?
Fantastic. You know, I've had the really good fortune of sort of, even though I have reached out to some people that I really didn't know previously, I had the good fortune to have a nice little circle of friends, and I go back with anywhere from a few years to, and with you, I think it's more than 20 years. I think we first connected by email in maybe the late 90s. Or something.
It may even have been before email because you and I were both doing marketing, and I may have heard about you doing your music marketing even before email was common.
Oh, wow. Yes, I consider when I first got online, I believe it was actually late 94, early 95. I got an AOL account, you know, when they were passing around all those free discs, you know. Way back in the day, and that's when I kind of got serious. Even though I didn't have my own website for a few years yet, I had email in the mid '90s, and so yeah, I think whether it was by old fashioned, you know, actually having to write a letter to somebody. Or by email, I know it was pretty...
telephone.
Yeah, the telephone too. And we did have a phone conversation, yeah, like in the, I think about 10 or so years ago. You were nice enough to chat with me, actually, when I was still working a full-time job. And in fact, speaking of that, I know, so how long have you been self-employed as a writer and, you know, doing what you do? When was the last time you had a day job or some other supplementary thing you had to do?
32 years.
32 years ago. So what year was that you...
It was at the end of 1978.
Oh, wow. So that's a long time of being...
No, sorry. At the end of 1980. So I count the starting of my freelance career, of my self-employment, from January 1981, because that's when my job officially ended. I was a college professor. And that was also when I had my first published article in January 1981.
In that first article, actually, I took a couple blurbs from your bio. That was actually in the Sunday, the New York Times.
That's right. That was my first article.
So that must have really felt good to start off right at the top there of the food chain, I guess, of journalism, right?
It was fun. It was great fun.
Cool. Now, I know you as many things, so I'm just going to kind of give a little sketch just off the top of my head and maybe glancing at some of the notes I made from your bio, but then I'm going to ask you to fill in some of the blanks before we go into our official list of questions. But I know you you're a writer, you're an author of several books, including probably the one that I first came into your awareness of you was probably 6 Steps to Free Publicity, which I know has been published in different... you've updated it, but when did that first come out?
That came out, first edition, 1994, and it's now in its 3rd edition from a different publisher.
Okay, well that makes sense. I would have just been getting email probably around the time that book was published. You also wrote, it says a total of 16 books, but Persuading People to Buy, Website Marketing Makeover, which I know we have a little bit of maybe I'll come back to that, our mutual experience with that publisher, meteor marketing copy, freelance writing for magazines and newspapers. So you're a published author. You've gone both the traditional route. I know you've also self-published some resources that we can talk about here. But you sort of, and I used to be, I noticed you don't do that anymore, but I know your website is just your last name. It's yudkin.com, right?
Well, I got that domain in the days when it was absolutely easy to get whatever you wanted. And there aren't that many Yudkins in the United States anyway. So I grabbed it and started using it. And it would just be foolish for me to change it at this point.
Oh, yeah. And when you used to go there, though, it was like a portal to the two different aspects of what you did. I think one of them was specifically for writers, maybe, and the other one was more for marketing, which you've done. You've talked about marketing and publicity. And are those sort of the two main staples that you've been involved with all these years?
It's changed over the years. So I would say that maybe 15 years ago, I was doing as much working with authors and prospective or aspiring authors as working with people on their marketing. Now I would say it's flipped so that I do much more marketing stuff than working with authors. I do a little bit of it because I enjoy it so much, and when people request it, it's like a special service, but it's no longer evenly divided.
Right. In marketing, this seems to be like, I mean, as you know, and many people watching the show know, that my sort of niche for 20 years has been music marketing, and whether it's music marketing or book marketing or whatever, your fitness, your spa or whatever, it's a topic that will be perennially. It's always in demand. People are confused about how to promote themselves, how to get publicity. Have you found that to be the case?
I do. I think, though, that as I said, my book 6 Steps to Free Publicity came out almost 20 years ago. Wow. Originally. And people now are more interested in social media than in traditional publicity. I think that's a foolish decision. I think that the TV, radio, magazines, newspapers are as powerful in getting your message out as they ever were. But for some reason, it's become a minor interest of a lot of people interested in marketing.
Right. And I guess the ways that you can market yourself, I mean, I think marketing was always confusing for a lot of people, but I guess maybe it was easier to wrap your brain around 20 years ago when you had, the traditional media and you had, here are the certain ways that you can go about getting the word out. But now that's just expanded, social media, and then the definition of what media is it not only includes the traditional newspapers, radio stations, TV, and broadcast outlets, but it's also bloggers and podcasters and people that have interview shows like this on YouTube, so it's probably even more confusing than ever because your choices are so there's so many options out there that people need guidance.
That's right. People get lost in all the options. I totally agree.
Awesome. And so, in your first book, it was published in the late 80s on freelance writing by a major publisher. And so, how would you, and now you also do like consulting and copywriting and all that, but what are some of the missing pieces? How would you describe who you are and what you do? Been doing all these 30 years, so people know who Marcia Yudkin really is.
Well, I would say the thread that runs through everything is that I'm a word person. So I'm the person you come to when you don't know how to put words together to say what you want to say. So earlier in my career, that was helping people with finding a publisher, with polishing up their book, and that morphed into putting the words together for publicity, and then for websites, and now it's however you want to get your message across. I can help you with the words and with the strategy underlying the words. So that's the thread that runs through everything.
Awesome. That's a great way to put it. And two more things for this little introductory thing. One is you've been publishing, I think, since 1998. You established what's now probably the longest running weekly marketing email newsletter on the planet. I imagine it's called the Marketing Minute, and you have been publishing that weekly ever since then without fail, right?
That's right. The only time I sort of missed it was on September 11th, which happened to be the day September 11th was a Tuesday, and I published my Marketing Minute on a Wednesday, I decided I didn't want to skip it completely. I sort of sent out a blank newsletter with just, here's a moment of silence. Nice. Something like that, just to let people know I was okay, and that this was out of respect for what had happened. But aside from that, I have published every single Wednesday since 1998.
Wow! And I don't know if this is one of the things you're going to be talking about. So please stop me if you plan on answering this in one of the upcoming questions. But I know that I've often heard that consistency is like a crucial thing when it comes to marketing. And it's admittedly, even though I've been at this consistently for 20 years, my regularity with email newsletters or podcasts or whatever has been all over the map. But do you find that to be a valuable thing when people can count on that thing showing up in their inbox every Wednesday?
Absolutely. And it's not only Wednesday, it's almost always between 7 and 9 a.m. on Wednesday. So people know that depending on which time zone they're in, they know that they can find it in their email box before breakfast, or if they're on the West Coast, people say they read it during their lunch break, and so on. And it used to be that if I was a little bit late, I would get alarmed emails from people. What's going on? Wow. I didn't get my Marketing Minute.
That's nice, especially when people think that email doesn't work anymore, and knowing that it's looked forward to is a real benefit. And it's called the Marketing Minute. It can literally, I think you used to do like a radio version of it, but it can literally be read in the course of a minute or so, right?
That's right. The way it started is I had a business contact who had a TV show in the Boston area and throughout New England, and it was called The Job Show. And she had interviewed me for her radio show before she had the TV show. She really liked my work. She wanted to bring me in on the TV show, but she didn't want me to have to drive to downtown Boston every Saturday to be in the studio just for 1 minute. So we came up with the format that I would call in, and I would have a spiel for just 1 minute as part of the TV show. So I discovered that 1 minute is equivalent to about 180 words. Mm-hmm. So from that time on, the Marketing Minute was always 180 words. And I say that you can read it in a minute. Actually, some people can read it in less than a minute. But if you were to read it out loud, it would take almost exactly a minute.
And that's probably a benefit too, because especially these days when people are so time starved and attention deficit and all this stuff, that having an email that's short and when people know and they're sort of programmed, and you've from your consistency, they know it's going to be a quick read. It's probably more likely to be opened and read and consumed and looked forward to, right?
That's the feedback I get. Subscribers tell me that this is either the only email newsletter they regularly read, or they say it's the only one they open when it arrives. The other ones they put in somewhere to read later because they know they can literally read it in a minute.
So that's fantastic, Marcia. And so before we go into the official list of questions, there's one little story that I'm aware of from your history that I think is fascinating. It's basically it's the origin of the idea for the book that 6 Steps to Free Publicity, which is probably one of your better known titles, but it didn't start off as a book. And if you wouldn't mind just recounting how that came to be, I think it's a fascinating story we can all learn from.
Well, I think it's interesting how that developed step by step. So step 1 was I gave a seminar. Step 2, I needed a handout for the seminar. So I created a 2-page handout on how to get publicity. What were the steps that you had to take? And then after the seminar, I had created the handout, and I thought, well, what can I do with this? So step 3 is I turned the 2-page handout into a 4-page booklet. And I called it 6 Steps to Free Publicity. And I thought, okay, now that I have this booklet, what are some ways that I can get it around? And remember, this is before the internet. Right. So I subscribed to a publication called Bottom Line Personal, which is still being published today. It is a terrific, interesting, and helpful publication that's in a 8.5 by 11 format, about 8 pages, I think. And it has a huge national readership. So I sent a copy of it in with a cover letter. They published I think 3 or 4 line notice in their freebie column. So it said just 6 steps to free publicity, send a self-addressed stamped envelope to get a free copy. So this was how you got things before you had
I remember that. The old days, yeah.
So she said, be prepared to get 500 requests. So I had printed up 500 copies of the booklet. And guess how many requests I got?
I remember it was way more than that. Yeah. Thousands.
About 5,000.
Wow. And you were probably regretting the self, I mean, even though you weren't paying for the postage, having to stuff all those reports and mail them was...
Well, no, it was actually fun, because what I did when I realized this was such a popular topic and people were so interested to get the information, I put together an offer that went out along with the booklet. So people got the booklet, and they also got offers for my consulting services, and it ended up being a money-making thing, definitely.
Oh, wow.
Then the next step was that I went to a publisher, and I told the publisher the story of how many responses I had gotten and the fact that there was almost no information in that little freebie notice apart from the title. So therefore, I knew I had a winning title, and I got a book contract. That was the beginning. And
expanded it into a full, and that's actually like one chapter, in a much fuller, longer.
That's right. That's right. And so there is one chapter that has those official 6 steps, but there's lots more in the book. And so it was a fun book to write. And I would say that of all the books I've written, it is my favorite.
That's awesome. It seems to be probably one of the more popular ones. I know I have it on the bookshelf somewhere here. I should hold up a copy, but I don't have it at my fingertips.
If you're looking for it on Amazon, you want to go for the one with the green cover, because that is the most recent edition.
The most recent one. Good. There's a lot of lessons there, and the way that would probably translate today is, I think that it's a good idea to test different titles, and I assume you agree with me that the title can be like one of your biggest marketing assets for a book, especially a nonfiction book. And these days, instead of maybe doing it in a freebie section of a printed publication, it could be like on Kindle. You offer a number of different titles for 99 cents or $2.99 or something, or you create special reports from your website to test out titles to see which one has legs, and which one to put more energy in. But do you think there's a lesson there that can be applied to the digital era too?
Well, I didn't ever test 6 steps to free publicity against anything else.
Right.
I just noticed that it was a title that appealed to people. So, notice what takes off. Definitely.
Right, because to me, success is a lot about just trying, like not being afraid to be prolific and trying a lot of different things, and then paying attention to the feedback and the response that you're getting, and then pour your energy into the things that's resonating with people, and maybe not so much into things that aren't, But I think that's
and I do work with information marketers, people creating information products, and if somebody comes to me and says they have a product that isn't selling and they're not sure why, the first thing we think about is, do we need to change the title?
Right, because that can be a huge factor. Awesome. So this is a great big overview of your background and what you stand for and all that good stuff. So looking back, Marcia, on your the 30 plus years that you've been self-employed, if you could pinpoint 2 or 3 key things that were responsible for your success, as a word person, what would those be?
Well, that's a great question. And I would say one is that when I started off, I had been a college professor and I wasn't fired. I had a limited time contract that ended. So I was eligible for unemployment, to receive unemployment payments. And as you know, there were not that many jobs for college professors, so it wasn't as if it was easy for me to be hired again. That meant that I had a financial cushion while I was exploring various options. So my first article being published in the New York Times happened just at the beginning of my unemployment, and I then had the leisure and the mental energy to see what I could do about getting published elsewhere. So I managed to get my freelance writing career off the ground very nicely in the first 6 or 9 months that I was unemployed. And then I no longer considered myself unemployed because then I had a new career.
Right. And so what would be the key factor in that?
The key factor is that I like having a low stakes situation. So it wasn't a do or die sort of thing. So I hear about entrepreneurs starting a business where they've taken out a loan and they've got to earn so much money in a certain amount of time or they're toast. And it wasn't that way with me. I had a bit of a financial cushion, and so I could afford to take some risks. Now, the second thing I would say about getting started is that I was absolutely fearless about contacting editors with ideas. So people wonder how I could have possibly started off at the New York Times. And it was easy. I just wrote them a letter, a half-page letter about an article that I thought they might be interested in. And they called me up and they said, yes, we'd like to see that article. And I wrote it and they liked it and they changed almost nothing. And I continued to be fearless in contacting editors who I thought might be interested in something I had to say. And it worked out often enough that I had a career.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So that's two factors. I'm probably going to come back and embellish a little bit here, but you want to go ahead and if you have a third one, go ahead and list that too.
I do. And one of the things about the way my career has developed is that I've never really had big overarching goals. The way I work is that I sense what the next step for me is. I pursue it. I go a little farther. And then at some point I go around a corner and I see something new that I hadn't been able to see from where I was just a little ways back. And then a whole new vista opens up for me and I'm into something else and I continue sensing, okay, what's next now? And that's how I developed from a freelance writer to a consultant to an author to a this and then that. And it was all very organic and never an abrupt change.
Wow. I'm so glad that you mentioned that because actually sort of kind of a part of this new interview series is also kind of sort of connected to a new book that I'm working on called the DIY Career Manifesto. I give a plug for it at the beginning of at the top of the show there, but I actually was just fleshing out a section that addressed this very thing where I talked about like put goal setting in proper perspective. Because I think and my views on goal setting have changed over the years, but I know some people like set this concrete, a specific measurable SMART goal or whatever, and then they like doggedly, head toward it, and and don't take their eyes off the prize or whatever. But I think that you need to be a little bit. I think having a goal to begin with gets you in action. It gets you moving. Gets within a specific way. But if you're too attached to that goal, you lose sight of other opportunities that come out in that more intuitive, kind of flowing kind of career. So, where do you find the balance between having a short-term goal versus not being too attached or being open to the possibilities? Because that's why my career has definitely taken that, where I'll set off in one direction. And by moving and interacting with the world, just like we said before, you got that feedback on the 6 steps to free publicity, which you probably didn't anticipate originally. But that's, here's something I should move into now, which you wouldn't have planned that prior, So where's the balance there?
I don't do a lot of planning except maybe a year. I know maybe a year out, maybe 2 years out, things I might want to do, but that stays fluid. And my life has worked out just fine without any big goals. That's
awesome. And then earlier when you talked about your first point about the low stakes and all that, and I think it's so totally true. Probably one of because you hear about these entrepreneurs, and that's obviously the name of the show, entrepreneur. Even though I've never really considered myself the typical entrepreneur, like with the high risk and big financing and having to get staff and all this stuff. But yeah, I that to me has never been appealing. The risky sort of burn the boats, and don't have a way out. I think you're much better off having some financial stability, whether that's working. And a lot of times often a full-time job will drain you, even though I certainly had many of them. And that was the launching pad that led to my full-time status came from working a full-time job. But even if you have to work full-time, you have to do something to have your basic financial needs, so you're not working from a sense of desperation. Isn't that like one of the worst positions you can be in?
Oh, absolutely. It drives more bad financial and career decisions than anything else.
Right, like you said earlier, I have to make money at this month, or I'm gonna, and you're just, that's not a very peaceful place or an empowering place to be working from to build a career.
And not only that, but also the people that you're dealing with sense it, and it repels them energetically. So they want to move away from it. They don't want to help you out usually.
Right. So I'm totally with you on that. Find some way, whether it's saving up from a day job or or just working part-time, or just having enough to have your basic needs met while you're building this new business. And then the fearless and the contacting, I think a lot of people and writers, this doesn't apply to writers, but they're intimidated by, I'm not gonna reach out to the editor at the New York Times, or they won't take my call, or they'll ignore my email, or they'll just send one email and I never heard back from them. I guess they're not interested. What was different? What made you fearless? What did you have to tell yourself? What traits kind of led to that fearlessness and just reaching out to people and saying, "Here, I got an idea that I think would work for you"?
Well, I think it has to do with being an introvert and living so much in your head that things become possible and they seem easy. I don't know how else to explain it. It's like I didn't have any models. I didn't know anybody who was a writer. So I didn't have any sense of how it, quote unquote, should be done. So I thought, okay, well, I have this idea. And what happened was I opened the Daily New York Times one day, and in the corner of page 1, in tiny, tiny print, it said they were starting a new section of the Times on education. And I was leaving my job in academic life, and I thought, I could write something for them about what it was like to be a professor, and compared with the way I saw professors when I was a student, and just sat down at my typewriter, again, no computers yet, and wrote it up and sent it off. And
got the response.
Right.
And the green light. So I think it's just not being afraid to reach out to people. And it takes reaching out to a lot of, not everyone is going to respond. I think following up is really crucial, especially by email or phone or whatever. Try different modes of communicating with people. Even Twitter these days is a way to connect with people, I found, when they're not responding in any other format.
Having people not respond was not really a problem as I built my freelance career. The bigger problem was getting paid, chasing the money. That was a huge problem. And I ended up joining an organization called the National Writers Union and got a lot of help and advice and learned a lot of techniques for prying the check out of their hands, or getting them to send off the check when they were stalling and maybe even going bankrupt. So that was the bigger challenge for me.
So now that we've covered some of the keys to your success over the past 30 years, let's talk about some challenges and how you overcame them. Looking back, if you had to identify a business or a creative challenge, what would that be? What did you learn from it? And share that with us, Marcia.
Well, I made an important transition in the late 1980s, I would say, from being a freelancer to being a business owner. And I'm not sure I could have told you why that was important to me to make that transition. But what happened was I found out about an organization of women business owners called New England Women Business Owners. And unfortunately, this organization is no longer in existence, but it was a great group. And I went to meetings and I started discovering that the way that the more established business owners thought about what they were doing and talked about what they were doing was quite different from how I thought about and what I did. And I sensed that I had a lot to learn. So I joined the organization. I went to meetings regularly, and not only did I have an opportunity to network, which paid off in the long run, not at all immediately, but in a few years it did. But I also, through the talks and through, there was a mastermind group that people set up. So about, I think, 6 to 8 women business owners would get together in a smaller group once a month and talk over their business challenges and brainstorm solutions. So both the larger group meetings and the smaller mastermind groups were extremely helpful to me in making that transition. So I would encourage people to find some kind of business organization that they can learn from. And I would say, even though there's so much of that online today, I think the person-to-person getting to know people in real life was an important component of how well that worked for me at that time. So I would encourage people to find mastermind groups and an opportunity to learn from other people who are a little bit ahead of you.
And so the challenge, it sounds like, that you overcame was maybe not knowing how to treat your freelance business like a business. Maybe you were treating it more like a hobby or something. Or
It's not that it was a hobby, but I didn't know about concepts like marketing, about cash flow, about just a lot of things that I take for granted and can't even name now. But I did know that I didn't know what I didn't know.
Right. And so
and I decided to learn.
And so, yeah, that's been a consistent theme through many of the interviews that I've done, is this whole thing of finding mentors or creating a mastermind group, but connecting with others to inspire you, and hopefully connecting with people that are maybe a couple of steps up the rung ahead of you, as you sort of mentioned here, that you can learn from. It's just like, if you play tennis or something, you try to play with someone who's a little bit better than you so you can learn, and they kind of force you to stretch and see things that maybe you weren't seeing on your own. So that's great advice. So let's talk about here now about if you could have a conversation, Marcia, with your younger self, and you can pick the age. Maybe it's 30 years ago or so, when you were maybe also on the brink of pursuing your full-time status here, and you could basically give yourself 3 pieces of advice. And let's go through these one at a time. But what would you tell your younger self to do exactly the same? These were the things that worked, so please do that because it worked for you. What would that step be?
I'm going to give you an answer. I don't know how you'll feel about this answer, but the truth is that I don't second guess myself, and I don't look back. So it's a policy I have, and it's just an instinct I have, that I don't regret things. I don't want to change things. I don't want things to have been different. I see the benefit of things having happened the way they did. And so it's like my mind doesn't go there. So I'm not going to answer.
Okay. that will be a short answer for this one. So yeah, and I have heard people say that too, that basically, yeah, the steps that you took, including the good, the bad, and the ugly, that led you to this point, made you who you are. So yeah, so you wouldn't want to go back and undo that, because it's the challenges and the mistakes that you made you a more stronger person and led to the insights and who you are now, basically, right?
See, it's even deeper than that. I don't truly believe that I made mistakes.
Okay.
It's not that I was perfect, but that concept of a mistake implies that you should have done something different.
I like this. So that's a mindset of a creative entrepreneur. I mean, yeah, it's not burdening yourself with, oh God, I made that mistake then, or what? And then I guess looking forward, does that also affect your perspective looking forward? You're not afraid of making an error in something new and uncharted, because if you don't regret the mistakes looking back, you probably don't fear them looking ahead either, right?
It's just that's not even in my thinking, mistakes. It's like a language I don't speak.
Wow. Well, that's interesting. Yeah, I think this whole, because I mean, a lot of people, I've been talking about mindset stuff, and and even in my marketing stuff, certainly you and I, we talk about the tactics of marketing, but I, for a long time, have been weaving in these little mindset and attitude things. And a lot of people who maybe aren't into personal development will go, oh, I forget that. Just tell me the step, what I need to do. But it's crucial. And so that's a different way that you think about this stuff that has really affected your success level. If you don't think in terms of mistakes, I mean, just think about how that your experience of life and business is so radically different than a lot of people who focus on that stuff. Yeah.
Well, it means that there's a certain amount of wasted energy that I don't have.
Right. So you'd focus it on the things that matter, like doing your work and
seeing what's ahead. Seeing what's around that corner up there.
Right. A couple of interviews back, I interviewed a visual artist named Flora Bowley. And one of the things when she was talking about marketing, she was just talking about it as fun. And I really had a great time kind of coming up with creative ways to offer my paintings to my email list. But that fun thing is like the polar opposite of what so many musicians, at least that I encounter, they think of marketing as a necessary evil or something that they have to do, or that business thing that they got to, switch gears. But boy, what a difference on how refreshing it would be to think of marketing as fun. Just in the same way not to think of mistakes, And I think we all have to examine how we perceive, the things in our lives. And is that an empowering attitude to have, or can we shift that? Like somebody who does sort of worry about mistakes, do you think they can make that mental shift?
It's possible, sure. Why not? I don't think I was born thinking that.
Right. So you had to develop it at some point.
Mm-hmm. Correct.
Awesome. Well, cool. Let's go. So we're not going to talk about any mistakes. We're not going to talk about anything that you did earlier, because everything is just fine the way it is. So let's talk about a book that changed your life. You've written a lot of books. I assume you're a voracious reader as well, as most writers and authors are. So what would be a book that changed your life, and explain, what was it, and how did it, and why did it change your life?
Well, this was a really interesting question. And when I was celebrating 30 years in business, I created a list of the 30 books that I most recommend to my clients, that I most recommend in general, really. So I went back and looked at that list and trying to find the one that had changed my life. And you know what? I discovered something really interesting. The books that I had put on the list were not anything that had changed my life. Rather, they were books that summed up and explained and passed along knowledge about something I had discovered just in life. So take an example. One of the books on the list is Alan Weiss's $1 Million Consulting.
Okay.
Now, it's a terrific book, and I know that I learned a few things from that book. However, I think that a lot of the most important points in the book I had already come to know when I read the book, but it's on my list of most recommended books because it summarizes and passes along so many of those lessons that you don't want to necessarily learn the hard way. And so I was hard put to find a book on the list that had really changed my life. So, but I can tell you one book on the list that did change me significantly. And it was a book by Lawrence Block, who's a fiction writer. And it was a book about the writing life. I don't even remember the title. He's written so many, and he's probably written this point in more than one book. And it was maybe only a sentence or a paragraph in the book. But what he talked about was his philosophy of money management as a writer who was on his own. So as a self-employed professional, you could say. Mm-hmm. He was earning money only from his writing. And he talked about how he had decided that it was important to own a house and pay it off completely. And that was the foundation for having a relatively worry-free life as a freelance person. And he may have talked about a few other things, but that made a very deep impression on me. And so when I had the opportunity and I bought a house, which was a lot later than many people do it, but I paid it off within 3 years.
Wow.
And then we decided, okay, no debt. And it's amazing how quickly you can build financial security when you have that as a foundation. Not only that, it takes away a lot of the worry and fear about the inevitable ups and downs in business. And you don't have to worry so much about what the economy is doing. And I have developed a philosophy of being very conservative financially. I don't invest in stock market. I don't want to worry about money. So I just keep my needs and my absolute must-haves pretty modest, and I always spend less than I make. And this has made for it's enabled me to do what I want in life and not constantly be anxious and upset and making bad decisions because of whatever is happening in the economy. So I don't know how relevant that is to you asking me the question, but it turned out to be a pretty important learning point, and it's something that I did get from maybe one paragraph in Lawrence Block's book.
Yeah, and that's amazing. Just a sentence or a paragraph. We never know as writers too when someone's going to read our own words and be touched in that manner, you know. But that's a powerful. It is a little bit different. Like a lot of people who have answered this question, and there's no right or wrong answer here. Of course, there are no mistakes, as we know. But other people have said something, you know, something inspired them to think, you know, philosophically in a different way. But that's a huge factor that probably plays into your not worry, no mistakes attitude. And it is true. I was kind of a homeowner late in life, and we find that the mortgage payment is like the biggest financial, you know, ongoing monthly expense that we have. And so if you can eliminate that, and also I forgot who it was but I talked about, a lot of people say, well, let's live within your means, which means don't spend more than you make. But really wealthy people are people who are financially independent live below their means, you know. So in other words, you maybe, you know, you purposely choose to live a more frugal life. Not that you're denying yourself simple pleasures or anything, but being sensible about your finances and creating structures and systems in place where you lower your debt and your ongoing obligations and your risk and all that. That probably helps you leave that sort of fear-free life, right?
Yeah, and let me add one thing to that, which is that I didn't have anybody teaching me about these things. So my father was a self-employed attorney, and he and his brother ran their own law practice. And but he never talked about money, and I mean nothing about how to manage your finances. And he died when I was not long after I had my first article published, actually. So I never had anybody I trusted to talk about that. I had a grandfather who had started off in the Great Depression as a door-to-door salesman, and then built his own company and retired fairly well off, and then, of course, lost it all because he lived much longer than he thought he would.
Oh, wow.
But again, I never heard any lessons in my family about how to manage money, so I didn't know anything about it, and I had to learn it all on my own.
It sounds like you learned from that mastermind group, the mentors, the Women's Association. You learned through books. And
that's right.
If you could send me a link, maybe if you still have that on a web page, your 30
yes.
Books. And did you say that one book by Lawrence? I forgot what his last name was.
Lawrence Block.
Is that among that list?
Yes, it's on the list.
Okay, cool. So I'd like to. I'll link to it in the show notes so people can see exactly what you're talking about there. Fantastic. So, well, here's a question that I actually just kind of added in more recent interviews, but I think it's a really important one, and that's what truly motivates you to do what you do. I mean, you talked about how you're a word person, but there are many ways that you have been able to fulfill that passion, through books, through coaching, all sorts of things. But what's your ultimate motivation in doing all this stuff, Marcia?
Well, actually, I love words. And I'm not just good at it, I truly love it. And I'll give you an example. Today, I was reading the newspaper this morning, and it said, there was an article about Oscar Pretorius, the guy in South Africa who's going on trial, and it said he was in court and he wept. So I looked at that word wept, and it just struck me. Every time I read about this guy, he's crying, but they never say he cried. They always say he wept. And I thought, okay, what's the difference between weeping and crying? Is weeping a more acceptable thing for a man to do than crying? They never say sobbing. They just always say wept. And so I actually spent 10 minutes thinking about this morning.
And only a word person would do, yeah.
Only a word person would do. And this goes back way, way, way back to my childhood. So when I was a kid, I can remember so many moments that had to do with words. So one of my favorite books when I was about 8 years old was this book. And I let me see if you can see what it is. It's called 30 Days to a More Powerful Vocabulary.
Oh, wow.
I read this book, and there's a chapter in the book called Words for Mature Minds. And he says in that chapter that here's a list of words that no 9-year-old could possibly understand. So here I am, 8 years old, reading this book.
That's probably a challenge for you.
One of the words was maudlin. So I made a point in school that year to use the word maudlin in a little composition that I wrote in school. And it's like, so there.
That's awesome. Well, I too can trace back my interest in writing to like 3rd, 4th grade. And it was something that I did things outside of the normal, most kids would just do the homework or the bare minimum, but I was like writing stuff on my own. And I always had this fascination with the written language too. And it sounds like that's a long-standing trait with you that goes way back, right?
Absolutely. And I remember there was one day I was homesick from school. So what did I do except besides watch TV? I didn't watch TV. Well, back then there wasn't that much to watch on daytime TV anyway. But I sat on the couch under an Afghan, and I wrote poems. That's what I did when I was home from school, and I had so much fun. So something like this would be my pleasure reading Robert Frost's poems. He's a favorite of mine. So when I eventually retire, that's something I hope to get back to, reading poetry, because that was one of my first loves when I started reading, and probably one of the first books I ever owned. We didn't have a lot of books in my house when I was growing up. We went to the library all the time, but for some reason, my parents didn't buy books. But I received a copy of the Golden Book of Poetry as a gift, and I treasured that book so much. I read it backwards and forwards, and learned some of the poems in the book by heart. So that was one of my childhood treasures.
And part of your bio that I didn't mention earlier, it says your first brush with free publicity was at the age of 7, which I think you were on TV and you read poetry, didn't you?
Poetry that I had written, yes. It was a local show in New Haven, Connecticut called the Admiral Jack Show, and they had a mixture of a studio audience of kids and Popeye cartoons. So they would show cartoons, and then they would break away to the audience, the kids in the studio, and I was invited to come up to the microphone and read some of these little, verses that I had written. But I did do that at age 7.
That's awesome. Well, I think the things that we're meant to do, we can trace back to childhood, and also it sounds like you're coming full circle when you want to get back into poetry more later in and in life. I think that's a wonderful closure. It all ties together. So let's talk about future plans, Marcia. What's your you've accomplished a lot. I know we talked a little bit about how your business has evolved, but what's in your future? What's your big sort of hairy, audacious goal, if I might call it that, for the upcoming?
Well, probably no surprise. I don't have a big, hairy, audacious goal.
Not a surprise at all.
But I'm not sure what's up for me even in the short term, and I'm planning to listen to my intuition and to see what's next. I was thinking about this, and if I were asked to identify the most fun thing I have ever done in my career, it would be at one point when I lived in Boston, I did radio commentaries for the local national public radio station. You know, those little 3-minute essays on the radio. Right. That was absolutely the most fun I have ever done. And the way that came about was that I was giving a talk in a bookstore, and somebody asked me a question. I don't even remember what the question was, but in the course of answering the question, I said, well, one of the things I would like to do, it was a question like this, you know, what's ahead for you? And so I said, well, one of the things I'd like to do someday is to do radio commentaries. And there was a guy in the audience. There were about 90 people in the room. And a guy in the audience came up to me afterwards, and he introduced himself, and he said, if you want to get on the radio, I can help you. I'm Monty Haas, and I recognized his name immediately. He was one of the newscasters on the local NPR station. And so we got together for lunch, and before we got together, I wrote one of those little 3-minute pieces, and he closed his eyes, and I read it to him as if I were on the radio, and he then introduced me to his news director, and within a month, I was on the radio.
That's awesome. That's fantastic. And that's also kind of speaks to the power of putting out there into the world what you're interested in doing, letting people know about it, you know, and you never know who's going to be in the audience or who knows somebody or whatever.
So if I had to think about something else like that, I would like to do radio commentaries again. It's just right now I live in the woods, and so it's a big hassle to do it, to go into the studio. But if there was something else like that I wanted to do, I would say maybe I want to have a weekly or a monthly column someplace where I was read by people who were interested in what I had to say. So that's it's kind of vague, but I'll put that out there. You never know who's listening and what that can lead to.
Absolutely. There could be somebody else there who say, I got just the perfect thing for you. And it's no surprise at all that you don't have any really super concrete goals, especially long term. So that has served you well. So finally, where can people find out more about you, Marcia? We mentioned it, I guess, at the top of the show, but go ahead and let them know again.
Sure. My website is www.yudkin.com, YUDKIN.com. That's my last name. Cute little six-letter domain. And if you know how to spell my name, you know how to find me. And on the homepage, I have a little section where I post what's new or what's coming up. So it might be something like the No Hype Copywriting Telesummit that I run every year in September, or the one-on-one marketing retreats that I run in Maui over the winter. So whatever it is, just look at the bottom of the homepage and see what's new.
Fantastic. And even though this interview will hopefully be timeless and people can listen to it at any time in the months or years ahead, if they are listening, a lot of people will listen to it when I post it, and so it should be just before. So what is it? The No Hype? What is that again? The telesummit?
No Hype Copywriting Telesummit, and that's in the last week of September.
And so it's all about because a lot of people are when it comes to in copywriting, we're talking about marketing descriptions and sales offers and all that, and a lot of people think you have to be all in your face and used car salesman, and it sounds like you have a philosophy with this where you don't have to.
That's right. It's all about how to use words to promote yourself without being obnoxious, without being overexcited, without exaggerating, and without lying.
Because that's not effective marketing when you do all those things that you just mentioned there. So
I agree.
I like it. I like it. Great. Well, thanks a lot, Marcia. I appreciate your friendship of all these years, and this has been a great interview. I learned things. I thought I knew a lot about you, but I learned a lot more in these past 45 minutes or so. So thank you for honoring the words that we all read and respecting the language and putting so much of your ideas and your words out into the world for the benefit of others. I really appreciate you for that, and thanks for your time.
Thank you for having me.
All right, you're welcome. I'll be back with another interview with a creative entrepreneur probably next week. Stay tuned. So long for now.